This is how to upgrade a BMW S1000RR with an OHLINS rear shock and a swing arm swap. Here's the 2010 BMW S1000RR, and I'm going to be replacing this shock back here with the OHLINS over in the corner. And the modification I'm going to start now is going to be taking the swing arm and replacing with the polished swing arm today. Looks pretty good. It does need some polishing, of course, and I'm going to scrape that sticker off there so I don't have to look at that. Just using a razor blade. I don't want to scratch the aluminum, so I'm just trying to get real flat with it. Shallow cuts. Also be careful to not cut my damn hand. Now to take this swing arm and replace it with this polished swing arm. First I want to clean it up and make it look as good as I can. It's got a little bit of grease here and there. It is a used one, so I'm going to take a little bit of acetone degreaser, clean it up, and then polish it first. Now that I've degreased it, I'm going to take some wet dry sandpaper and try to get just some of these little tiny scratches out before I start polishing it. I know they're not all going to come out. Some are a little bit deeper over by where the chain is, but might as well try to get out some of this stuff before I start polishing. If you look close, I was going to try to sand some of the surface cracks out because I thought this was polished aluminum, but when you look and you sand and it looks different, then that means there's actually a silver paint or coat or something on it that I just sanded through. So I can't sand out the scuffs like I thought I could. What I'm going to end up doing is I just need to polish this as best I can with just some kind of a finishing compound. That's the trick, is some of this stuff, when they do a paint like this, it looks so close to polished aluminum you think it actually is until you burn through the paint. And I've done that before on the old Aprilia swing arm. I used the finishing polish just to make it shine as much as I could with the coating that's on there. And I've got some wax I'm putting on it. While it's off, it's easier to get a good coat of wax on it, and then of course once it's all together, I'll wash it and put another coat on. First I'll pull that rear fender, whatever you want to call it, off. Just 3 little bolts, get that out of the way so I don't accidentally crack or scratch that while I'm doing the rest of the work. Make sure the tail section looks like it lines up on the swing arm good. Now I'll take the wheel off just the way you would normally. Start with the big socket to get that out, pop the axle. Now I'm going to take the chain guard off. It's got 2 fasteners in there. Put the chain guard over here by the rear fender. I already have it up on the rear stand. And now I'm going to take the rear axle nut loose. I want to do it this way so that I'm pushing down against the ground versus lifting up back here. Now I need to knock the axle back through. I'm going to put a brace underneath here, something to kind of catch that tire when it does fall so I don't bind anything up. As you pull it through, set that off to the side carefully so something doesn't scratch that axle. And then, now that the wheel is clear, you can kind of set this down a little bit and watch your caliper and your disc here, as well as your chain and sprocket on the other side. Just make sure everything falls free and doesn't break something. Now the tire is on the ground, free of my caliper. Sprocket's looking good over here. First I'm going to try to get the chain loose, the sprocket and the carrier. That off to the side. Make sure not to lose any spacers when you're doing this. Chain's clear, wheel's clear. Just roll this out of the way. We want to get the rear caliper free of the swing arm. So I'm just going to slide it off that ramp. I'm going to hang it up here off the passenger peg basically. Try to be careful not to scratch anything. And leave that up there for now. Because we're changing swing arms, you can see the chain actually goes through the swing arm. So we have to break the chain. And if you look up here, I've just been rotating around trying to find the master link that I used to put this thing on. If you look closely, All the ends of the rivets have almost like a squared / round pattern to them, but it's consistent. All of them except that one right there. You can kind of see that's just round versus squared like the ones to each side of it. So that must have been the master link. So that's the one I'm going to break and then replace with the new master link. Alright, the master link is out. We can take the chain out of the swing arm now and put it aside, and then we'll install that new master link once it's ready. Now I'll take the axle adjusters out, which is basically these blocks, and then these bolts and nuts for the new swing arm. The blocks off, loosening the jam nut. Now I can just put the wrench on the end, just back these out, put them off to the side. I need to get that screw on the left out of there, which means I'm probably going to have to take the screw on the right loose and pry that panel back or even remove it. I did have to take that panel off. It's just a few screws here and one up under in the front so that I can get clear access to this bolt down here. It's kind of a pain to get to, but I'll get it. It just takes a while. But before I pull that bolt out, I need to jack up the bike. So I'm going to use the points here where the footrests attach. And over here I had to remove the shift lever. So I've got those two guys on there. We'll see if this works. Okay, it's a little risky, but so far so good. So this bolt over here, I got it loose, but I cannot get it out of there. So I'm going back here and taking apart what I can. I'm going to take that bolt out of there, start the process this way. After taking that bolt loose, I finally got that link loose up ahead. So I had to kind of wiggle this and then use a magnet to get that big old bolt out of there. It's a pain, but it's out. Now I'm going to take this top bolt out of the shock, but before it's all the way loose and out, I need to grab the shock because that's the last thing holding it in place, I think. Now I took this joint loose just now. That's the bottom of the shock, which means that top bolt is all that's holding it up. So now I'm going to ease out that bolt and catch it on the way down. See that plate behind the bolt? It's got a matching on the other side and they can go in either way. So pay attention to the way it was, because if you change that, you're going to affect the geometry of the bike. So I marked them with a T on the top surface, and then the orientation and everything, they came out of the bike. I've also laid all these items out here in the configuration that they came out as well, to make sure I don't get confused putting those back. You can see the shock is not going to go down through that hole in the swing arm, so now it's time to actually take the swing arm loose, starting over here. I removed the nut and the washer. Again, same configuration. Now you're going to need a spanner wrench of some kind. This is one I had that was close that I just modified a little bit, but ideally use the BMW part number, and it's actually cheaper than what these other ones are. But you need something as a spanner to loosen this castle nut out here. You end up using that and just give it a little bit of slack and loosen it, and then you'll push that out towards me from the other side. And be careful to mind your swing arm, of course, because that's the last thing holding it still. I had to make my socket a little bit shorter to get the right leverage, but got it off and it's loose now. Now that we have the castle nut loose, just use our wrench and start backing that out. I want to make sure that I'm paying attention and holding up the swing arm, because that's going to fall as soon as that bolt comes through. Once that pin was unthreaded, I pulled it out and through while I braced the swing arm and the shock that was sitting in it. It all came out in one piece. So everything is completely apart now. If you have any doubt about your regulator, now's the time to change that. Just opened the OHLINS rear shock that came from Kyle Racing, and this has been set and sprung for my size and riding, and it was the last one they had on the shelf for a 10 S1K, So I got it, and it's going right there. Compression, 1, 2, 12, 13, 14, 13. So there's 13, that's 13 in. 12, 11, 2, 1, 0. That's where it was. 13 out from bottom. Rebound. 1, 2, 15, 16, 17. 17 in. 6, 1, 0. And I can write those numbers down elsewhere for future reference. I gave them my weight, so they selected a spring and all the settings based on that 210 pounds. And they've set the riding style up for mostly hill country back roads, which is most of what I do with an occasional track day. Now I'll finish taking off the last few items, like the spools off the swing arm, as well as that cover. Looks like there's just a couple bolts on that that need to come off. The last component will be this little link that has to come off. And one more on the bottom. Again, put things in the order they came out and the orientation so you don't mess it up later. And don't forget to get all the spacers and stuff, like things like this on each side, so that you have those too. Measure the two shocks and make sure you have the same length, or you'll have problems with geometry and you'll change the way it steers and handles. Gonna weigh the stock shock, 5.18 pounds. Because they're such a pain to get at, while I'm in here, I'm gonna replace my regulator with a new one that I happen to have on the shelf. You can see that the torque screws have been replaced with a hex screw. That makes it a lot easier to get that regulator out down the line if you have to without taking everything else apart. I'm also adding a lock washer to it. Don't want to use Loctite or it'll be a nightmare getting it out. Lock washer gives it a little bit of stability without being a total pain to remove later. Screws are in snug with their lock washers, and then all you have to do is color code the gray and black to each mating one on the regulator. And make sure the connectors snap into place when you're putting it together so they're not loose and cause you problems later. I'm ready to start the installation process now. So I'm going to grab my top marked spacers and bolt that went through from this side and put those in place with the shock, and so I can hang that. It's going to be easiest to put this in before you hang the shock. That side's in. Got the other side in. Now I'm going to carefully slip the shock into place and carefully put the bolt through, but making sure not to push that bushing on the other side out. Okay, that bolt's in place. Spacings are right. Have not tightened it yet. I'll do that in a little bit, but I want to just make sure I start getting things positioned. Since I have everything apart, took the time to use a little Zephyr on the aluminum linkage parts. Get them back to their factory shine, or maybe even a little bit better before I put it all together. Have my assembly grease on the bolt. It's going to be going through that. As with any of these fasteners, get out the torque wrench and make sure that bolt is tight. Now we need to connect that lower joint on the shock to that link, to the swing arm, to that link, and back into the frame, as well as these points into its mount on the frame. I don't know that there's an absolutely correct way to do it, so I'm going to start just doing it in reverse of how I took it apart, which means putting this one in here first. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you want to learn more about how to enjoy amazing machines like this.